Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome to our program. Our programs are scheduled for most Sundays at noon, and they're free, open to the public. Our church is located at 4700 Grover Avenue. We encourage you to attend. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And now, one of our forum committee members, Douglas Bauer, will introduce today's speaker on criminal justice topics. Thank you, Douglas.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce Leah Pinney, and from the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. Leah will be talking about the state of criminal justice in Texas, the right and left coming together. Her presentation will be talking about the tremendous human and physical cost of historical criminal justice policies in Texas, and how the TCJC, the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, is partnering with unlikely allies, like Republicans, and creating coalitions to bring about essential reforms. Moving forward amid growing national momentum to end mass incarceration, Texas has a unique opportunity to implement meaningful changes that will build safer communities, foster stronger families, and create huge cost savings that can be reinvested at the local level. Before I turn Leah loose, let me talk a little bit about her background. Leah is a graduate of St. Edward's University, where she earned a Bachelor in Political Science with honors. She's worked with the TCJC team for several years in various capacities. Officially joined the organization in 2007, is that something right? Yeah. She brings work experience from both corporate and nonprofit sectors, including work involving project research for national civil rights organizations. Her original work with the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, she was supporting youth projects where, through research efforts, she helped to advocate for increased safety and accountability within the Texas Youth Commission. Leah later shifted her focus to pretrial and defense, where she worked with key partners to promote best practices and policies that ensure opportunities for indigent defendants. Last few years, Leah's worked as an organizational financial manager for the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, and just a few days ago, she was promoted to be their new executive director. So, with that as an introduction, I'd like to introduce Leah, talk about the right and the left coming together. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here today. It's a beautiful day outside, and I'm so grateful that you all took time out of your day to come here and talk about criminal justice reform. It's a pleasure seeing you all. I'd like to let you know our organization has been around for about 15 years. Our previous executive director she just recently left. She's going to D.C. It's an honor to follow in her footsteps. Let me tell you, we have a fantastic team. So when I talk about all of the things that we're going to talk about today, I just want to make sure that you know that we're a fairly small organization, but I think we're pretty impactful. So I look forward to sharing that with you. So if you want to, let's go ahead and get started here. Make sure that I can see where we're at here. Go ahead and click the slide here. So the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition values its partnerships with people in the community. We work with practitioners; those are the people that are on the ground implementing the policies that are taking place, and we work with policymakers. Our goal is to bring all of these voices together so that we can come up with solutions that are going to help create stronger families, safer communities, and create taxpayer savings. We want to make sure that our government is efficient and effective and that it's doing its best job to serve the people of Texas. Our organization has 4 major programs or projects. We have Solutions for Youth Justice. That project focuses on making sure that there's best practices used when addressing youth that are system involved. We have solutions for pretrial, defense, and innocence. Our organization doesn't do any direct client services, so we don't represent individuals in the criminal justice process, but we do advocate for reforms that will help make sure that their process is more fair and just. So on the pretrial side, that might include uses of validated risk assessment, or making sure that people who don't really need to have high levels of bond set, that they actually can return to their communities. Since they're pretrial, they haven't even been convicted, so keeping them out of jail at an earlier stage is important. On the defense side, we truly believe that making sure that the system is balanced against the state, that there is a meaningful, zealous defense for people so that there's integrity in the process, and that we protect those who are innocent from moving further into the system. Part of our role in that is making sure that there's adequate state funding to the counties to ensure that indigent defense is taking place at the county level, protecting people who are impacted by the system. We also have one of our larger projects is our solutions for safely reducing incarceration. The goal for that is to divert people out of prisons and out of jails and keep them in their communities whenever possible. Of course, we want to keep our communities safe. We think that there's other ways to do that than just locking people up. We also have our fourth program is Solutions for Confinement and Reentry. We don't do a lot of work on conditions of confinement each session, but a few sessions ago we were able to weigh in on TDCJ's, which is the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, their sunset process. We had an opportunity to talk about conditions of confinement and how people are treated when they're incarcerated. And we do look for opportunities for reform, such as the use of administrative segregation. We find that that's a terribly traumatic and sometimes abusive process, and we'd like to make sure that that gets changed. And on the reentry side, we truly believe that people who have been system involved, they've done their time, they've completed their process. When they return to the community, they need to have a real and meaningful chance to turn their lives around. So investing in successful reentry is important to us as well. So I have, oh, great. Oh, you've got it working. Fantastic. So if you want to go to the next slide, and I think we've got one more after that. And one more. One more. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Great. Yeah, keep on going until it gets to that next one. There you go. Perfect. So here's a list of things that when you think of this small organization, all of the different things that we do to accomplish our goals day in and day out. I'm not going to read through all those. In a nutshell, I just want to tell you that we identify what the problems are. We educate stakeholders and people in the community to what solutions could be, and we mobilize people so that we can affect change and create those reforms. I'm actually really excited to be talking to you all as a group, because I noticed that your mission statement is that you gather to nourish souls, transform lives, and do justice. This is what we're talking about, having people who care about the justice process and care about how it impacts our lives and are willing to step up and make a difference. And so one of the ways that we are successful in what we do, if you want to change to the next slide, is we call it being smart on crime. This is sort of the role that I'm talking about, where we partner with other groups. When we reach across the aisle, I know Douglas mentioned Republicans. We'll also reach to liberals as well. We'll reach to anybody, frankly, because I think what we need to do is find what our common ground is. We want safer communities. We want kids who can go to school and learn. We want just an environment that we can all thrive in. The question is how do we go about that? And so we'll reach across the aisle to find people who care about these things as well, and try and find a solution that fits all of us to make sure that justice is done. I'll talk a little bit more about some of our coalition partners a little bit further on. To give you a little bit, if you want to change the slide, to give you a little bit of background about where we are and what mass incarceration is and what we're trying to address. In 1980, there were 30,000 prison beds in Texas. Texas is a big state, 30,000 prison beds. In a 25-year span, we multiplied that by 5 times. to 155, more than 5 times, 155,000 prison beds in a very short period of time. That's mass incarceration. This is what we're tackling. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So in 2007, the Legislative Budget Board estimated that we were going to need another 17,000 prison beds by 2012. So we had that growth in prison beds, and then we realized we can't continue on this same path because it's only going to get worse if we keep doing the same thing over and over. We don't want to build more prisons. We're at a crossroads. We have to come up with another plan. The legislature came together, the left and the right came together and decided that they were going to invest in community-based solutions, whether that's probation, treatment alternatives, something other than locking people up. So the success story is that by 2012, you can see that we didn't end up needing to build those thousands of prison beds. We averted that crisis, and not only that, but we've started to shift the prison population downward. Now, it's not as far as we'd like to see it go, but when you take into account Texas's population growth, we've actually reduced our incarceration rate by 12%. So it's looking pretty good, but we know that we have a lot more to do. Next slide, please. So in that process, since 2011, we've shuttered 3 adult prisons, and we've shuttered 9 youth facilities since 2007. It is great news for us. We're excited about the path that we're on, but again, there's more for us to do. Next slide, please. To give you a snapshot of who we have in our Texas prison system right now, more than 3 in 4 new Texas prison admissions are for a nonviolent offense. 3 out of 4 for nonviolent offenses. Nearly 30% of all new prison admissions are for drug-related offenses, and many of those are for possession only. And lastly, the rate of imprisonment for people of color is more than 4 times that of the rate of imprisonment for people who are white in Texas. These are surprising statistics to me because I really think that we can do better, that these people that we're talking about in mass incarceration, these numbers of people who are there for nonviolent offenses, we need to do something different for them. If you look at the next slide, please. The Urban Institute took a look at some of our numbers and found that 44 other states, their total prison admissions were lower than our admissions for just drug offenses only. Now I realize Texas is a big state, but again, that's a lot of people who are in prison unnecessarily and who aren't getting the help that they really need. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, no problem. Well, I can tell you that the cost of this number here, of these statistics here, is staggering in terms of both the fiscal and human costs. We spend about $3 billion a year on corrections, and most of that goes directly to incapacitation, the prison aspect of locking people up. Not as much goes to those community-based solutions, such as probation that we're talking about. This is largely locking people up in prisons. So that's the fiscal cost. This doesn't even include the human costs of what it means to families who've lost a loved one, who gets pulled out of their home, out of their community, sent far away. It's a challenge to visit them. In some cases, there's issues with children being able to visit. We really need to make sure that there's fewer children growing up without their parents or that don't have contact with their parents. But more than that, those people could be in the community. They could be getting treatment and assistance so that they can keep their jobs and keep in stable housing. And there's many reasons why locking people up isn't going to be the right solution. So in addition to being expensive, prison is very often ineffectual for making lives better. So we sort of have that choice again. Do we want to spend money incarcerating people who don't need to be incarcerated? Or do we want to take some of that money, the money that we spend incarcerating people who have nonviolent offenses, that $3.5 million per day, imagine what we could do to help put that back into our communities, to our schools, to provide services for people with mental health issues, with substance abuse issues, to make sure that we have thriving, healthy communities. That's a lot of money that we could be reinvesting to help prevent people from going into prison in the first place. Next slide, please. So in terms of cost, that large number, that $3 billion, is made up of this cost per day to some extent. If we want to send someone to prison, it's going to cost about $52 per day. That's not on any kind of specialized services, just basic prison. Alternatively, if we want to keep someone in the community, we can spend as little as $1.63 a day. So say someone's got more challenging needs. They need to be on higher level of monitoring. They need to have more programs. A lot of times people on probation have to pay for a lot of those services. It's not 100% of the services, but it's a lot that they have to pay for. We'd like to see some of that cost shift back, that sort of that reinvestment back into supporting so that those people receive those services and it's not such a heavy burden. When you look at what the cost is for that more intensive supervision, it's about 1/10 of the cost of prison. So $5.61 instead of $52, right? So if we could make sure, and not everybody's going to need that level of services when they're on probation. We don't want people getting more services over service. We need people to be assessed and have the right kind of services to help them turn their lives around. So even if we spent more money on providing people services, it's still going to be 1/10 of the cost of what we're paying for prison right now. Next slide, please. We'd like to see that investment go a little bit further. So we do know that Texas is on the road to recovery, maybe recovery from our own addiction to prisons. We'd like to see that those people are sentenced continues to drop, and not only have crime rates dropped, but recidivism rates have dropped. So we're in a good position to keep this moving forward. But again, we still have more work to do. Next slide, please. So Texas works on, the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition works on policies that will improve public safety, reduce recidivism, safely reduce incarceration, and save taxpayer dollars, all of those things that we've talked about before. Some of those things that we do to accomplish this, there's a program in Seattle called LEAD, which is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. We'd like to see more of those in Texas. Basically what that does is it helps people, a model of it might be for use for people facing prostitution charges, people with low-level possession or drug charges, to have law enforcement step in, see the need in the community, work with local resources, and divert those people into programs or assistance that will help keep them out of the prison. That's what this could look like. Providing treatment for people with mental health issues and substance abuse issues would be important. Making sure that the punishment fits the crime, sort of right-sizing the system. And also really addressing the root of the problems rather than the symptoms of the problem is what we aim to do. Next slide, please. So I think we're pretty effective. We have helped to pass over 150 criminal and youth justice bills. I actually think this number might be higher after our last session, so I look forward to increasing that. I can say that some of the work that we've done have included in this last session, and by the way, I want to make sure you see this. If anybody's interested, we've got our legislative wrap-up that will talk about each of the bills during the last legislative session that we helped to support or worked on, and I think she may be passing that around. But just to give you a few highlights, we've worked on making sure that the youth system ombudsman, that their role and their purview was expanded beyond just the lockup in state facilities to include pretty much any out-of-home placement for youth, so that ombudsman can make sure that those places where youth are held are safe and secure. We do have, we're not there yet, but we have an adult system ombudsman, but it's not independent. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So the youth system does have an independent ombudsman, and we were able to help expand that role. We were able to make sure that the property thresholds that people are charged with was adjusted to inflation. Basically what that means is that the monetary value of property for people charged with property crimes hasn't been adjusted in decades. and we were able to make sure that that more reflects what the value of today's property would be, so that people aren't being overcharged for something in terms of their being charged by the justice process, to make sure that they're more fair in how that's turning out. That's actually going to have a pretty good impact, I think, in reducing the level of people who are being incarcerated for property crimes. We also were able to help on the reentry side, reinstate benefits SNAP benefits for people who have a felony drug conviction. That's a core population of people who really need additional support to be successful when they get back into their communities. SNAP benefits help to make sure that they have food and some basic assistance, so that when they get out of prison and they have nothing, they have a real chance at least getting started in their new lives. So that's a really important reform that we had. And there's many more. I invite you to check out that wrap-up that we have. Next slide, please. Oh, already on it. Great. So some of the ways that we're able to get the work done that we do is through our partnerships. Like I said, we reach across the aisles. So in terms of political spectrum, we work with a diverse group of people. In addition to that, we also look outside of the criminal justice realm, and we find people who work on other areas and see if we can partner with them. For example, the Smart on Crime Coalition here is made up of the Texas Association of Business. They represent business interests for the entire state of Texas. They're a key partner with us in many of these reforms. To the right of us, we have the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and to the left of us, we have the ACLU of Texas. We also have one of the largest service providers in the state. Goodwill Industries is part of this coalition. So we're really proud. We also just recently invited a religious organization, the Christian Life Commission, to be a part of it. We work very hard to try and make sure that our partnerships are effective. We identify people who are also able to maneuver in their communities so that they can get change implemented. So we have to be very strategic in who we partner with, but we're excited about the breadth of partners that we have. We also partner, our youth justice team partners with other advocates who work on youth justice issues. So the more that we can have a larger group of people saying something very similar, the more likely it is that we can help affect change. They also bring key information, areas of specialization that help inform our policies to make sure that they really do work, that they're not just, a policy that we think will be good, but that it's been tested and we know it will be good because of the information that we receive from a broad spectrum of partners. So our Smart on Crime Coalition has already solidified its legislative agenda moving forward. And so one of the things that we've started this past session that I'm so excited about, because it really has a strong opportunity of making it, is our effort to raise the age of juvenile jurisdiction. Right now, if you're 17 years old, you're going to be processed as an adult. There's not a whole lot of information that says that's justified. In fact, what the information tells us, science tells us, is that brains aren't fully developed. These are still kids. They're not fully culpable for their actions. Just because you have a birthday doesn't mean that you're going to become somehow a violent youth offender. You've just had a birthday. And frankly, there isn't much difference between a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old in terms of, what they're arrested for. So we'd like to see those kids, kids in high school still kept in the youth justice system. We'd also like to raise the threshold on the lower end as well, making sure that younger kids are kept out of the juvenile system whenever possible. We need to abolish the Texas Driver Responsibility Program. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. It's a program that funds trauma centers. Well, I want trauma centers. I don't want them to go away. But the program that funds them is broken. It basically, people who have had certain traffic offenses, traffic violations, will end up going through the court process, having that adjudicated, but when they're back in their communities, DPS, the Department of Public Safety, will assess a separate level of fines on them. They may not even always know that that's happened to them, and what happens is they're out driving around, they get caught driving, and it evidently with a license that's invalid because they didn't pay their fines they didn't even necessarily know about, or maybe they couldn't afford to pay their fines. What happens is then they get in more trouble. They get another level of fines assessed on them. It makes it even harder. They're trying to get to school, get their kids to school. They're trying to get to work. They can't keep the burden going on this. So they've got to get out from under that. We have to find an alternative method of funding the trauma centers than through this program, because people are losing their driver's licenses. They're not keeping up with their insurance. It's basically bad for the entire community. So we're going to work on that a little bit more. We need to utilize probation instead of incarceration for those nonviolent offenses that we talked about. It's truly more effective. One of the things that we'd like to see is that if we are going to utilize probation more, we'd like to support them with more funding. But if we support them with more funding, we also want to make sure that their outcomes are measured properly, that they're using the best practices to make sure that people are successful on their probation. We don't want to see revocation as being a measure of success. We want to make sure that those measures are in place and that they're using the evidence-based best practices to keep them moving forward on their lives. We'd like to reduce specific penalties for certain minor offenses. Specifically, we'd like to address marijuana. We'd like to see that, and some certain property offenses. We'd like to see opportunities where people can, participate in a program, give back to their community. We'll talk a little bit more about a couple of other bills that we'll work on that will elaborate on this. But again, reducing those penalties for minor crimes and reduce those probation revocations. We truly think that if we can have probation consistently across the board, using those evidence-based practices, keeping in mind the best interests of the people that they're supervising and moving them forward, we're going to reduce those revocations. And that's going to in turn reduce our incarceration levels. And we need to improve our reentry outcomes. So we've got some bills with them. We're excited about it. But in addition to these bills with the Smart on Crime Coalition, we've got some more bills. If you want to do the next slide. We'd like to have fair chance hiring for public agencies. Basically, you've probably heard it referred to as ban the box. It's really delay the box. Employers, whether they be government or private entities, can hire whoever they deem is fit for the position. The reason why we do this is because we feel strongly that if you ask for reentry and you want people to reenter successfully, you sort of have to back that up. You have to make sure they have opportunities to do that. And we think that delaying the background check for people so that they have a chance to tell you what happened in their lives and what they're going to do to change it and move forward is an important step in that. I can tell you that we are a fair chance hiring agency, and it was one of the best hiring decisions that we've ever made. So we're excited about it, and we hope that other people will consider it as well. We need to have diversion programs for graffiti offenses. Something as simple as having, a graffitiist, a kid who's tagged a wall, go back and clean it up. There are viable programs where this is going to be a much better process than, locking a kid up for a graffiti offense. So that's one of the things we'd like to address. Eliminating a felony class for prostitution offenses. A lot of the women who are in prostitution are women who have already been victimized, who are already, suffering from trauma. The last thing that they need to do is get put into jail, or go into prison. They need other resources and assistance to help them turn their lives around. We'd like to allow a Class A misdemeanor conviction for successfully completing probation for a state jail felony. Right now, there's a lot of people who choose to go to a state jail rather than go into probation. We'd like to flip that, because state jail is for a certain period of time. It's defined. You go in, you do your time, you get out. Whereas probation is going to have conditions. It's going to have obligations, responsibilities. You have to pay for it as well. So there's a lot of people who don't want to deal with that, and they'll choose state jail instead. We really want them to get the assistance that they need and turn their lives around, and so we'd like to have an incentive for them to choose probation rather than to choose state jail, and that would be taking their felony conviction and dropping it to a misdemeanor, which will help them in the long run as well. They don't have to say that they have a felony conviction when they're looking for employment. We'd also like to clarify the language for DWI offenses. Right now, if you're sitting in your car, you've been out, you've been drinking, and you decide, wow, I've had enough, I'm going home, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to sit it off. I'm not going to go drive. I'm just going to sit in my car. Evidently, right now, you can get a DWI for that. We'd like to clean that up a little bit so that people who aren't driving aren't getting a DWI. Next slide. We've got a few more that we're working on. We'd like to require written or oral consent prior to a warrantless search. Basically, I just want to clarify, law enforcement will always have the right to search your vehicle or conduct a search in general because they've got probable cause. So if they have probable cause, they can do it. Lawfully, that's in their purview. If they don't have probable cause, we don't want them searching. We don't want them going on fishing expeditions unnecessarily. Have probable cause, move forward. If not, make sure that people understand that they're waiving their rights. Make sure that the system is geared so that people know they have rights, rather than just assuming they have to forfeit them because an officer says, hey, can I take a look? We're just asking for informed consent. Of course, probable cause, go ahead, search. No probable cause, ask for consent. We'd like to prohibit arrest for non-jailable offenses, such as Class C traffic violations. We don't think that people should be hauled off to jail for traffic violations. If they aren't going to have a consequence of going to jail, they shouldn't go to jail just because they were arrested. So keeping people out of jails that way would be a good way. We need to reform the use of administrative segregation and solitary confinement. Like I said before, it's an abusive practice, I think, in many instances that causes people, there's an article recently, causes tremendous trauma and even death. We'd like to see that changed. And we're not experts on administrative segregation, but there are a lot of people out there who've done fantastic research that point to alternatives for other ways to handle people who need to be a little bit more handled a little bit more carefully. We'd like to require the independent oversight of Texas prisons. So remember I said that the youth justice system has an independent ombudsman. We'd like to see that on the adult side. It seems like a reasonable step to us to have an entity. There is an ombudsman, but to have an independent ombudsman makes sense to us. Structurally, that's a sound practice. And we'd also like to reform the bail and bond system to reduce reliance on pretrial incarceration. Another document you have with you is, I want to make sure you get it. It's our data sheet. We produce this for every county. And Travis County, there's numbers in here that talks about our pretrial population. It's actually pretty high. We'd like to see those pretrial population numbers go down, and we think one of the ways to do that will be to facilitate the effective use of PR bonds quicker. So right now we've got a length of stay. People might get a PR bond, but they're still sitting in there for a while. So we'd like to strengthen that process. But not every county is using the personal recognizant bonds like Travis County is. We see room for improvement there. And also, we need to not set such high levels of bail for people who don't need it. And if you are going to do that, let's use a risk assessment, and that can be the high level. That can be the ceiling for the threshold for that. So let's move on. I think I've got a little bit more. You may have recently heard about, how many people have heard about the Sandra Bland case? Yeah. That was heartbreaking for us. I just want to let you know, so in addition to those legislative activities that we pursue and public education we pursue, when things like this happen, we will step in and we'll do our very best to try and make sure that these tragedies can result to positive reforms in the future so that they don't continue to happen. It was really regrettable and avoidable, her death. There's ways to look at it all the way from the very beginning of, well, why was she necessarily pulled over in the first place? She was trying to get out of the way of a cop car coming quickly behind her. She was pulled over for not using her signal. So, why was she pulled over? Why did it escalate? I don't think that a cop should be saying to someone in their car, I'm going to light you up with a taser, because they asked, they asserted their rights about whether or not they should, get out of the car or put their cigarette out or, whatever next step it would be. That practice of escalation as opposed to de-escalation, we'd like to see that change a little bit more. And then even after that, the incident of pulling her out of her car, kneeling down on her, asking for guidance on how to get her so that she could be arrested, getting her into a jail, not letting her get out, holding her there, knowing that she's got a mental health history, treating her in a way that resulted in her death is just, it's appalling. and we'd like to see changes that will just stop that from the very beginning. Let's use de-escalation techniques. Let's not take people to jail for a traffic violation. Let's if they are going into a jail, if they've got a mental health issue or a history like that, we need to come up with a plan on how to help them. And honestly, jail's not the place for that. People with mental health issues don't belong in jails or prisons. And we'd like to see some kind of other resource for them. So one of the things that we did, I just want to make sure, is we provided testimony. One of the legislators held a hearing about that. We provided expert testimony on that. And we also wrote an open letter to Waller County officials asking them to address those various problems in the county. And we're hoping that other counties will listen to that as well. And I think that's all I have for right now. But I do want to let you know that we don't do this alone. We do this with people like you, and I invite you to sign up for our periodic emails, sign up for Twitter, Facebook, stay involved, engage your politicians and the people that are running for election, ask them questions to make sure they're satisfying your answers, engage others, exactly what you're doing here, this amazing forum. And if you'd like to support our work, I invite you to become a sustainer. I have more information on that as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I know we're going to have a lot of good questions. Jim Bryce?
Hi.
Thank you very much. Very impressed with what you've done. It's a difficult area. 50 years ago in law school, I was in a special program on criminal justice. So I'm familiar with the issue, and I followed it for years. Worked with the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, and helped found an organization called the Council on Dispute and Diversion. It's very important areas. The real problem appears to be a mindset. We saw this 50 years ago, where we saw an issue that retribution basically is the concept most people have of what the criminal law is about, and the idea that building physical facilities and putting more money into law enforcement, etc., was the solution. I think you've got the ideas going in a better direction. One thing that you did not demonstrate, or did not say, I think, enough, is the cost. We're convinced now that it costs roughly $1 million if you don't divert. My question is, what do you think can best be done to demonstrate to the public and to the legislators the incredible cost and how it can be reduced by diversion and by the elimination of most of what we have on the criminal books now? The usual solution is statutes that do not do anything except destroy lives and cost.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is shifting public culture, shifting our, well, we can't do it alone, but I think it's groups like this, it's our opportunities to reach out and collaborate with other organizations and entities that aren't even, for example, the Texas Association of Business. We would have not thought about reaching out to them until our executive director said, we've got to do something more. We have to incorporate these voices. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a long-term process. But part of it has to do with understanding, framing human beings, framing everyone as valuable human beings to some extent. Valuable in the sense that we all deserve human dignity. We deserve a certain level of respect in how we treat people and our responses to them while they're in crisis. I don't know that we can do all of that, but it's certainly the path that we're on. And I think part of it starts with groups like this, going out and talking to people. When this hits the news, when you hear about someone, just the other day, a gentleman who was in jail for a 10-day sentence, ended up in isolation and basically died in custody. I mean, those are the types of things that when they come up, we should all be talking about. We should all be worried about. We should all be taking a stand on, because it could be someone that we love. We really need to make sure that that culture shifts. Not just, it needs to happen in the public, it also needs to happen in the institutions. The public's going to have to drive that, though. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it'll happen, but it's going to take a little bit of time and work like this.
We have a question from Gary Bennett. Gary?
You did not address this directly, but following national trends, one of the most regressive tendencies in most states seems to be the the movement towards privatization of imprisonment, which and all of a sudden you have great groups who are profiting out of incarcerating people. Could you tell us what the state of that movement is in Texas?
Yeah, I think I can. You're right. Private prisons has been a tremendous problem for us. I mean, basically what it boils down to is we've abdicated our government responsibility over to a private entity who has an interest to make a profit in how they run that institution. They're going to want to cut services. They're going to want to, limit the effectiveness of supervision, pay bottom dollar, and it's resulted in some very, very poor outcomes. I think we still have I think we have between 10 and 15 private prisons still in Texas that are in TDCJ, and I think 3 of those might be state jails. I think we'd like to see all of those shift. I think that the government has a responsibility to make sure that these are managed appropriately and that we are investing. If we're going to incarcerate someone and we know that they're going to get out, we need to make sure that they're handled in a way so that when they return to their community, they have the opportunity to turn their lives around. And I think that inherently attaching profit to that sort of runs up against the objective. So we would like to see more of that change. We're not the only organization working on that. There's a few other organizations working on it, and in order to reduce some of the costs associated with incarceration, we can't just reduce some populations here and there. Necessarily, you have to shut down a prison because there's the building costs, there's the infrastructure. That's where you're going to have the savings, is if you can actually close a unit. And maybe some of those of the units are the ones that we need to look at. We're going to continue to find, opportunities for where we can make a difference, so that money is reinvested in the communities, and we'll look at those to make sure that those, if they're the worst unit that's out there, that's the one we want to go.
We have a question from Richard Halpin.
Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I've spent 35 years creating successful alternatives to the criminal justice incarceration, and I'm curious what your solutions will be to the high percentage of people of color in prison.
Yeah.
And what the policy solutions are that you're working on. And 2, if you've got policy solutions for pre-release planning, it seems to me that was always critical to do and never done for people who were incarcerated.
That's great. Those are 2 great points. So you're absolutely right. The impact on people of color is tremendous, and the issue is that as you get further into the system, those numbers tend to increase. People of color, as you get further in, their numbers tend to increase proportionally. It's staggering how that's happening. It's obviously not one person or two people. It's a system that is causing this disproportionate minority contact. We have to be careful about that. For example, the risk assessment instruments that I mentioned earlier for people who are facing pretrial, those often have a historical context to them that tends to have more negative outcomes for people of color, just because of the way that the risk assessment is designed. So we've got to be really careful. It's actually every step of the process that we need to look at. It's really not just a front end, but it's throughout the whole system. We need to look at the tools that we're using and figure out what's happening and why are they disproportionately causing more people of color to be impacted more harshly than people who are white, who are doing the same things. So that's a fantastic question. I wish I had an answer to solve it all, but I think we are looking at that as we move forward in each of our policy areas. And your other question was on parole, pre-release planning. Thank you. So that's an interesting thing. If you do all of your time, when your time's up, you're out the door. You have nothing. I know that TDCJ has established their reentry division and that they have reentry coordinators. I think that those reentry coordinators need more support. We need more of them, and they need more support. We get calls from people who are in TDCJ doing their job, and they're calling us for the resources. And they're telling us, and we've shifted our resources from being paper-based to be a database online, because it's just, we've got to get that information out there, and paper isn't efficient. So we've got an online database. They will call us and tell us that they want the old printed version that has outdated resources because they can't use the online system in the prisons. So somehow we've got to figure out how TDCJ can do an effective job at supporting their reentry coordinators, making sure that they're doing a good job, and having some of that work result in some measurements, some outcome measurements. Are people able to find a job when they get out? Are they able to get housing when they get out? How are you actually helping them be successful in their communities? That's a fantastic question. Yeah, we'd like to address that further.
We have a question from Pamela Lancaster.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I've worked for 35 years as a defense attorney, prosecutor, and a judge in the criminal justice system. And the biggest single common denominator among clients or defendants is the lack of education and lack of ability to take care of themselves, and so they choose other paths. And so I wonder what your involvement is with just keeping people out of the criminal justice system with education and training. And then the second question is really about gun control. Because although I desperately agree with you that police need to be retrained to de-escalate as opposed to take control, you know, as long as everybody can have a gun and as many guns as they want, when police come to a scene, they have to assume that there's going to be guns, they have to take control. I mean, so what involvement do you see you having with gun control and education?
Okay. So those are really good points, and it's great to hear someone with such a broad range of criminal justice experience and practice. It's fantastic. We don't work on gun control issues. So I'm gonna set that one aside. That's a very politically polarizing issue. I'm just going to set that one aside because we don't work on it. I don't think I'm going to be the most effective person to speak to that. On your other question about sort of that front end, like what are we doing to help people just stay out of the system completely, right? I think that's what you were asking. We don't do any direct client services, but what we do is advocate for policies that would support that. It's a challenge because we do know that that you have successful outcomes for people who suffer from severe mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Monitoring plays a good part in making sure that there's successful outcomes, not just treatment. So we do feel like probation is a good entity for that kind of monitoring, but we'd like to see more incentives for people who maybe don't need that higher level of monitoring and treatment to be completely diverted. And that would be in those local community programs. But as we've seen over time, many of those have been underfunded and have gone to the wayside. So ideally, if we take some of that savings from incarcerating people and we shift it down into the communities to where those sort of pre-justice system resources are available, I mean, that's what justice reinvestment would look like to us. We understand that we need to still continue to invest in probation. We do view that as a diversion from prison, but even more a diversion from the criminal justice system in general would be a fantastic place to invest some of those resources, because if we can help people in the earlier stages, we're not even going to have to pay for them over and over again down the road, and they're going to be able to have those happier, more productive, more successful lives in their communities. That's a great question.
We have a question from Tom Jones, who's visiting from Waco. You're a UU in Waco, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. I got a two-part question.
Okay.
The first part is, when you said there was a third-party oversight over TDCJ, were you talking about ACA?
So not third-party oversight. I'm talking about the ombudsman. TDCJ does have an ombudsman role. They are sort of a liaison, and I think that what we're trying to achieve with that role is to make it independent. That's the key, is that they're not independent. It's sort of like asking police to police themselves, or, so we need to increase the strength and effectiveness so that they can monitor for safety, so that they can, there's a lot of issues that I think ombudsmen could really support. The Prison Rape Elimination Act. We need to make sure that even if you are incarcerated, even if we do feel like you are a public safety risk and we're locking you up, that those conditions are humane and that they are safe and effective, and ideally help you to get on a better path when you get out.
And the reason why I bring that up, as you know, I represent the correctional officers as a union representative. But we fought
and for your safety too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we fought for meticulous oversight over our training, which is something I think you guys supported along with us. We fought them all the way to the governor's desk, and then they got the governor to veto it. Even though it was successful and they did raise their training standards.
Yeah.
We support you guys on that, but how do we go about making sure that we get something like that passed? Because they're going to fight you guys all the way to the governor's desk.
Yeah, we do. We've had that. So bail bondsmen, police unions. Yeah, it's a challenge. I think that there's other strategies that I think other organizations are going to have to help take on to make sure that we can achieve that. We are going to continue to pursue those opportunities. This legislative agenda that we have here, we're pretty tight on that. That's about as far as with the staff that we have, until we have more funding to support more staff. This is where we're at. But I think that what you're talking about is going to be a long-term goal to make sure that those things get changed. And it's part of what I hope will be sort of a culture shift that sort of more clarifies the role of correctional officers to be a little bit more mindful about the population that they're serving. And if we're going to ask for more responsibility and more training and more effective use of correctional officers, then the other thing we need to do is make sure that there's funding that's tied to support that. So we're on board.
We have about 5 minutes left. A question from Ham Richards. Ham?
Could you say a little bit more about left and right coming together on criminal justice issues?
I think so. So the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, like I said, we've got that Smart on Crime coalition now. Previously, our executive director, I'm sort of speaking, what I've heard, because I haven't been directly engaged in that coalition building. That was our previous executive director. Wish she was here to talk about that. But she's worked really hard to cultivate a relationship with the Right on Crime group. We don't agree on everything. For example, privatization of prisons was one that we disagreed on. I think that some of the re-entry issues related to the ban the box is another one that we probably would have, disagreement on. But what we do is we find what the common ground is. There is part of me, I wonder how this will go if crime rates go up again, if we have some other larger shift in our justice process. I hope that our coalition, that our partnerships would stand. I think that we've had the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better at different levels and to understand where we're coming from. And I think that we're coming from good places, actually. I think that we all want those safer communities. We also want to know that, that our kids are safe, but also that if someone's going to be locked up, that they're going to have the right treatment. But what it comes down to is a cost savings as well, right? So the right side might agree with us because they want government transparency and saving taxpayer dollars, and the left might come because they really care about the human dignity and human rights and what that looks like for people who are incarcerated. So I think ultimately we want safe communities and we want those partnerships. And honestly, the only way that we're going to get these things done is by building those partnerships. We've had some criticism from people say, well, you're not doing enough. You're not moving far enough to the left. I have to say, I think we have moved, a fair amount to the left, but we can't do it ourselves. we can't just make things happen. And we had, some people said, well, maybe you're not far enough to the right. We just have to find that balance in what's going to help us continue to move forward, find that shared, that common ground, so that we can then start from there and move forward again. It's I think it's very incremental. Our process for sure in Texas is definitely incremental, and specifically our legislature meets once every 2 years for just from January through May. It's designed to put brakes on reform. That's how it's set. So if we want to get things done, we have to work collaboratively. And so that's been the leadership that we've had before and that we'll continue to have, is how to find those effective partnerships, maintaining our integrity in what we believe in, but finding the differences in other people that could work with us, that we can find common ground on.
We have just a couple of minutes. A question from Douglas Bauer.
I'd like you to follow up a little bit on something you mentioned earlier, which is the disparate effect of bail bonds for minor crimes. Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference between $1,000 bail for somebody who's indigent versus a hedge fund manager. Mm-hmm. Are there any options to make that more proportional, or how would you handle that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think so. I'm not an expert on it, but I do think that one of the starts. So some counties use schedules. That's coming into question as to whether or not using a schedule, saying here's your crime, here's your consequence. There's a question about how those schedules are used and whether or not they're even constitutional sometimes. I think the key is that, and there's people who are looking at, okay, well, maybe we need to use risk assessments. Well, risk assessments, to determine whether or not there's a flight risk, to determine whether or not they're going to show up in court, if there's a public safety risk, that kind of thing. Those types of instruments can be expensive to put in place. So what we'd like, and there's an instrument that's being proposed that doesn't involve any interviews, which is a more cost-effective way of doing this. It's still being tested, but it looks pretty good. But honestly, there are some things I think that you're talking about that are just a minor level crime. Like maybe we don't even need to have that. Keep people in their communities. I mean, it's not more effective in having people show up for their court date.
Leah, thank you so much. You're off to a fabulous start.
Thanks for sharing your time with me. And thank you. Thanks.
Would you be available to stay for a couple
Sure.
more minutes?
I'll be right over here.
Leah will be here for a few minutes to answer your questions.